Back now on the theme of new parties that have, of course, entered into the National Assembly perspective. Let me welcome my next guest, Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster. She is from Build One South Africa. She's a member of parliament, and of course, she is the deputy leader of that party. Nobuntu, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Talking Point here on Hilaal TV. No, it's an absolute pleasure. I think we're just going to try and get your audio there. Can you hear me now, Nobuntu?
I can hear you
Okay.
perfectly. Can
No,
you hear me?
yes, I can hear you. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No, I'm really glad to be here.
Nobuntu, it's a question I asked Mariam, of course, who was my guest before, from the MK party. You know, just the representation now of females, it seems to be getting bigger and bigger, which is always a great thing. I mean, how excited and proud does it make you feel that the number of women representation within the National Assembly continues to grow?
So, I mean, this particular administration or this particular parliament has had a slight decline in the number of women who are represented in parliament. So we do, though, however, even that being the case, still remain one of the countries that has the highest representation of women in parliament around the world. So that is great. But we have seen a slight decline in this seventh parliament, and we want that to grow. I think the other thing to consider is that while we see a growth in the number of women in the seventh parliament, for instance, it's important that we look at what is the participation of women in politics generally. What roles and positions do women hold in political parties? We saw that in the local government elections in 2021, we had quite small representation of women in that we had 37% of women candidates being women in 2021, and that went down from 41% in the previous local elections, which was 2016. And then for the national elections, we had 6 of the 52 candidates. So when you look at that ballot paper, only 6 of those 52 candidates who are the actual leaders of parties were actually female. So while we're doing well and we ranked well in the world in terms of representation in parliament, there's still a lot to be done about getting women to actually the top of leadership in politics and in public leadership.
I think you touched on that second. I think South Africa ranks second from the G20 coefficient. So I think that is quite an important aspect with regards to that. Nobuntu, and before obviously you became a member of parliament, you were running for the Gauteng Premier candidacy. And I think, if I stand to be corrected, you were the only female that was running with regards to that. So, I mean, you've mentioned it, the participation of women in politics. There has to be more, is there? I mean, when you look at, of course, the Good Party, it's got Patricia de Lille, who is probably one of the very few female leaders of a political party. Now, how does that change? How do we, sit at the table when, you've got more male representations from a leadership position, but to say, look, let's change that. Let there be more female representations. Let there be a change in the guard. It takes time, but it has to happen nonetheless.
Absolutely. Look, there was another female that was running for Gauteng Premier, Vuyiswa Ramakopa
Yes,
from
yes, Rise Mzansi. I forgot about that. Yes.
Who were running for premier position in Gauteng. And so, even then it was only 2 women. And like I say, of the leaders or candidates that were on the ballot list, only 6 of 52. And you mentioned Patricia de Lille. There's the likes of Helen Ziller. There's leaders we've seen in the ANC, like Naledi Pandor, who have done well, like Nkosazana Zuma. But we need more, Naledi Pandor, about 2 weeks ago, in an article in the Sunday Tribune, and then I was actually blessed to have a conversation with her on the same day that that article was released. I happened to bump into her and we had a conversation. And she had said in that article and in that interview that she, if we'll remember, she was supposed to be Cyril Ramaphosa's running mate for the ANC, and she had put her hand up, and then she ultimately withdrew, and she says she regrets that. And part of what she says is that when I was speaking to her, part of what she says and part of what she said even in that article is that women have to be more willing to put their hands up, once you've made it, because there's lots of barriers that exist for women to even enter and participate in politics. But once we're there, you know, what she says is women have to be willing to put their hand up. They have to be willing to contest. They have to be willing to say, I want to be president. And we just haven't seen enough women who are willing to say, I want to be president. I want to start this journey and serve my country until I become the president of South Africa. And we need to see more of that. But there's a number of things that need to change for us to be able to see that. First of all, women are affected more disproportionately by the socioeconomic challenges in this country. So they're the likeliest victims of violence. They are most affected by failures and inefficiencies in service delivery. They have the major burden of care work in the house and in the community. And even with issues of the economy, women are the most unemployed. The face of poverty in South Africa is a Black woman. So all of those things are the things that affect really the participation of women. And those are the things that we need to start working with. First of all, how do we start seeing women as leaders? People like myself, I'm a co-founder of a political party, I'm a deputy leader of a political party. We need to see more of that, because the more we see women leading, that's when we start to view women differently. I was on an interview 2 days ago about women leadership and about women participating in politics and in the economy. And part of that conversation, there was a caller who called in and said, well, with men having not done well as presidents and in leadership in this country, how much more would a woman fail if men are failing the way they're failing? And that's to say that women are somehow less capable than men. So if we still have that kind of thinking in this day and age, we're really going to struggle. We have to change the thinking, and it starts in homes, in families, it starts in communities, and it starts with us seeing more women and giving more platform to women to lead. So we start to experience the leadership of women.
It's very similar to racism, for example, Nobuntu. So, for example, you can learn it from your home and then you carry it into workplaces or schools. We've seen that, of course, with the schools crisis that is happening here in Gauteng, when, you know, the whites-only WhatsApp group that was discovered at the Pretoria High School for girls. You know, in Cape Town, you've seen, you know, this auction of Black pupils that is happening, and a lot of it starts at home. And you've hit the nail right there when we talk about women leadership, that this discussion has to happen regardless of when. You know, you're talking about black female presidents that could be in this country, female presidents that could be in this country. I mean, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka was probably the last, and she wasn't stone cold set as a president. She was there on an interim basis. And that's probably the last time we've ever seen a deputy president, it's actually a deputy president. She was the deputy president of the country at that time. And that was probably the last time that we've seen, you know, a sort of position given to a female at that moment. How does those conversations happen? How does it occur that we can have an actual female leader taking the bull by the horns and saying, I am the right person to lead this country? But that can only happen, Nobuntu, if the public, if those around her, her advisors, are able to say, we are giving you the opportunity, go ahead and show that there is that capability right there.
You know, how we started to see women CEOs, how we started to see women in executive positions in this country, although we still don't have enough. I think we're sitting at about 27% of directors on JSE-listed companies in this country being women, and 29.4% as executive managers. But how we started to see that is that there was legislation and policy that was put in place for us to start seeing that. It's the same way that we started seeing people of color in those positions and in those leadership roles. There had to be legislation and policy that was put in place. So unfortunately, that is the only way, because 30 years later, we can see where we are. And that is the only way that we'll be able to see changes, when we have policies and when we have legislation in place that ensures that, for instance, political parties are making sure that they have representation in their ranks. When the Commission for Gender Equality released and published the reports, which stated the percentage of women that took part in the local elections, and I'm sure they're going to do it again for national elections. What became clear was that there's a need for some sort of intervention, and they put to Parliament some recommendations, and part of those recommendations are in making sure that there's legislation that ensures that political parties have women represented on a quota system, on a 50-50 quota system on their lists when it comes to elections. They also suggested the zebra system, making sure that you don't then find yourself with number 1 to 50 being men, and then number 50 to 100 being women, making sure that it's a man and a woman and a man and a woman all the way down the list. That is an example of what can be done, because beyond the societal, beyond the family, beyond the community, you also need to have measures or mechanisms that ensure that there is opportunity for women. You also, most importantly, I want to say, have to make sure that you have men who are sponsors. And I use the word sponsor because even in corporate, that's the word that's used. That's when people are more than mentors. They're not just mentoring you, they're not just guiding you, but they're making sure that they are championing for a seat at the table for you in whatever way that they can. We also have to make sure that men buy into this reality that we have and this need for us to have more women represented. I think once men also see the value and the importance and the need for us to have women better represented, then we'll see them also playing a part. This can't be a women's issue. Just in the same way as with apartheid, this couldn't have been an issue where it was just black, colored, and Indian people that were fighting for equality. You had to have white people as well that understood the value and the need for us to be equal. And so we need men that come to the party and men that are willing to say, we're going to champion this. We're going to be sponsors for women that we recognize and identify for leadership as well.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster. We're going to be touching on, the role that women play within the public and private sector. But she touched on something important, and that how does now men play their part in championing women at the top echelons of our society? Up next, we'll continue that conversation. Do stay tuned to Talking Point. Now, Nobuntu, I had a conversation just prior to the elections with Voisera Mukhopa from Rise Mzansi, and she was talking to me about, her previous stint, which was, of course, in corporate, and the challenges that she went through in the corporate space. And you've hit the nail on the head with regards to there has to be an acceptance, there has to be an initiative from men to allow the championing of women to be in that seat in the table, to be in the upper echelons of society, whether it's public or private. Because it's one thing having these public holidays like the 9th of August, but putting into practice becomes an even tougher challenge. But it doesn't need to be a tougher challenge. There just needs to be implementation, and that implementation needs to start with men. How far or how close are we in that actually happening?
Sure. I mean, when you look at the numbers, you see the thing is that it can be so deceiving. When we look at, when we look around, when we look at companies, when you look even at Parliament. And I always say that this representation that we have, which is ranked amongst the highest of women in Parliament, means nothing if it doesn't lead to impact in business, if it doesn't lead to impact in communities, if it doesn't lead to women being at a better position and at a better place than they were before, because they are better represented in Parliament. So we have to make it count. I say this as a member of Parliament myself. I have to make it count that I'm there. It has to count that I'm there for the woman in rural Limpopo. It has to count that I'm there for the CEO in a business who is a woman. It has to count that I'm there for a young female student. It must count for a young unemployed woman. It has to count that there are women who are in Parliament. And until that can translate into the lived realities of women, it means nothing. And as it stands now, the picture, like I was saying, can be deceiving. But the reality is that, for instance, in 2022, almost half of South African women between the ages of 15 and 64 were recorded as economically inactive by Stats SA, and that isn't only by choice. Poverty is higher among women in South Africa, Black women in particular, because they're not only more vulnerable to unemployment, but when they do work, they're subjected to the reality of the gender pay gap across industries. And that's a conversation we need to have, that there exists a gender pay gap which disadvantages women, often women doing the same jobs as men, and they are paid less than men. The current unemployment rate for women in South Africa is 35.5% compared to 32.6% for men. And Black women's unemployment is close to 40%. So you also find that jobs taken up by women often get jobs that are at lower levels of employment. So even when you have, for instance, state-owned enterprises, where the numbers are good, government entities, where the numbers of women representation are good, you find that they are in the lower ranks, and at the higher ranks, you'll find more men. I mentioned earlier that only 27.7% of directors on JSE-listed companies are women. Women-led businesses in South Africa still only make up 21% of the formal SME sector. I could go on and on and on. So the situation, to answer your question, is not good, and we are still far. And really, there are women. I was on another interview again this week, and there was a woman who called in because the presenter was saying, we're not getting women calling into the show. There's only men calling in, and we're talking about issues that affect women. And a woman called in and she said, because we're tired. We're tired of having the same conversation over and over again. And as you rightly point out, having the conversation only in August or only when it's the 9th of August. And I will reiterate again and underscore that the only way to change this is where there is legislation and policy that already exists, such as for government, for the private sector, in respect to the triple BEE legislation. We have to make sure that it's implemented, and there needs to be penalties for not implementing it. And the same would go now for when we talk about public leadership. Let there be legislation and policy that speaks to the representation of women in the public sector, in public leadership, in politics. Because until we have something, it's very clear, 30 years later, unless it is in law, it's not going to happen.
Nobuntu, another scourge that women are tired of is gender-based violence, and women have every right to be tired because, as men, there has been a failure, a clear failure. As government, they still haven't grabbed the bulls by the horn in trying to address this. Even now, you just hear of the rape, you hear of the attacks on women, and it's something that is just not stopping. And when the criminal justice system comes into the frame, there really isn't a harsh sentence with regards to this. There has to be a change, Nobuntu. And I know we can do the lip service with regards to this, but that action has to be implemented, and it needs to happen now. Otherwise, in 2025, on the 9th of August, or in the month of August, we're still going to be having the same conversation. And quite frankly, it's going to be a conversation where it's sickening, and it's not getting to the point where this has to end.
Absolutely. We had COVID in 2020, 2021, and we saw the measures that were taken because that was seen as a crisis, seen as a pandemic. We need to have the same kinds of measures taken against violence, which is against women and children. We just simply are not doing enough. We need specialized staff at police stations, professionals who know what they are doing. We need specialized courts. We need a specialized aspects of the judiciary to deal with this. We really need to invest like it's the crisis that it is in ensuring that we address the issue of gender-based violence. This is something that we as Build One SA are championing. We didn't only start now with it being August 2024, we're recommitting to it. But we have started a course to make sure that, first of all, the Sexual Offenders Registry is made public. Because one of the things I noticed is that while you will always remember the names of an Uyinene
Mm.
or anybody else who was a victim of gender-based violence, we often don't know the names of the perpetrators. I know Uyinene's name. I don't remember the name of her perpetrator, because those names are often quite protected compared to the victim. And so that sexual offenders registry has got to be made public, because this then means that women can safeguard themselves, whether it's a colleague, whether it is somebody who is courting you, whether it is somebody that you are meeting through social circles. You are able to know whether this person has a history. And it's not to say that people can't change, but it's to say that you, at least the law, has allowed you to be able to protect yourself, whether the person has changed, whether the person is reformed or not. And so that is critical. And that's something that's one of the issues that we're driving as Build One SA. We have to have measures in place, similar to the issue we spoke about of economic participation, of leadership reform. The same goes for gender-based violence. The law has to be able to protect us better. And there needs to be the kind of measures that will ensure that not only do we deal with GBV once it's happened, but we're also able to prevent it. And a sexual offenders register is one of the preventative measures that helps to make sure that we're able to take measures to prevent more gender-based violence from taking place.
Nobuntu, I've got one final question because we are running out of time. I've been watching you obviously in the National Assembly, and you've been, quite a fiery individual as you are to try and really hold the executive to account. How do you maintain that in trying to make sure that the interests of women are also put as a priority? The interests of not just women, but also young women are put in the front so that legislation can happen which will allow more empowerment of women and more protection of women within our country.
So as a start, one of the things that I'm going to be driving on behalf of Build One SA in Parliament is making sure that the various recommendations that have been put by the Commission for Gender Equality to Parliament is following up on those, is making sure that they are still being reviewed and making sure that they are attended to. That is a first. That includes the issue of public representation of women, as well as the representation of women in politics and in political leadership. So I'm going to be following up on that very strongly in Parliament. The second is that I sit on the Trade and Industry Portfolio Committee. And, there are various policies that sit in place about women in the economy, some of them being about the procurement by women, the procurement from women by government entities, which currently has a target of 40%, but only 1 to 5% is actually what is being implemented. So procurement by government entities is only at 1 to 5% from women. I'm going to be following up on those kinds of policies in the Trade and Industry Commission and making sure committee and making sure that we are holding that department to account, making sure that that department is able to deliver on those targets, because they exist. They were announced by the president, but as it stands now, we're not seeing what we need to see in terms of that transformation. And then lastly, there's a women's caucus in Parliament which has not convened yet. But I will certainly be actively participating in the Women's Caucus in Parliament to make sure that the issues of women in this country are brought to the fore. I'm on a constituency break at the moment. We're in communities, and I am engaging with women to be able to make sure that their voice is represented even in that Women's Caucus. But yeah, those are some of the plans in Parliament of representing the interests of women.
Nobuntu, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster, Build One South Africa Member of Parliament, and of course, she also serves as the deputy leader of that party. Well, that's all we have for you here on Talking Point. From myself, for Hospital, the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Jazakallah so much for staying with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.